Next up is Mitchell Moss, who is the Henry Hart Rice Professor, Urban Policy and Planning at New York University, Wagner Graduate School of Public Service, and a very well-known civic leader here in the city.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank the Citizens Union and the Common Cause and IPERG for organizing tonight's event. It's a great privilege to follow Randy Mastro. He not only speaks for himself, he speaks for the people who follow him. And he's so gifted. He's so gifted that he's able to tell you what I'm going to say before I know what I'm going to say. Let me briefly talk about the issues that Dick Dady raised, which is how does it affect government? And I'm going to try to frame term limits differently. And I want to make 3 points. One is that limiting the power and terms of elected officials does one thing. It favors lobbyists, campaign consultants, and career bureaucrats. We diminish our elected officials if we don't give them the time in office to learn about government, to represent their constituents effectively, and to do jobs which require some learning and know-how. And so we have seen an explosion in the campaign fundraising business and the growth of these campaign consultants because they're constantly trying to find ways in which they can both educate the new officials, help them get new jobs. And so good government, the essence of citizens' union, the very reason it was formed over a century ago, is hurt by limiting the elected officials' time in office. It's intrinsically hostile to giving our elected officials the capacity to be effective in their job. I think we have to understand that this is especially important because New York City really is a $60 billion enterprise. That's our government. It has the job of affecting all of us. We have 1.1 billion of gallons of water, which we deliver every day. We have over 6,000 miles of water mains, 1,100 different schools. This is a city which affects every one of us in different ways. We don't all use every service, but all of us use some aspect of the government. And to assume that it's an amateur business, that you can simply have rotation every 8 years and get the same quality, I think undermines the skills you need to do a good job. And so I think we have to recognize that we deny ourselves talent, we deny ourselves the capacity of having elected officials who can serve people well by using the artificial idea of 8 years in office. The second point I want to make is that special elections do have a history in New York. We had them for over a quarter century when we had school board elections, which are held in May. And the turnout was under 5% in many parts of the city. And who came to special elections? Special elections get organized groups, union members. They get very, very effective representation of the political clubhouses. I'm delighted to see the distinguished former leader of the Bronx, Roberto Ramirez, here. And he would tell you that the special elections for school boards are wonderful for people who really know how to game the system. But I think we have to recognize that when we do have special elections, they have very low turnouts. And I think the numbers which were used by two of the speakers said that we had 600,000 people in the 1993 election voting for term limits. That's less than 10% of all the people in New York City. I think we should understand that even when they're held during the general election, referendums have a drop-off of about 40 to 50%. And so the idea that they're going to be representative by having special elections is not only untrue, it shows that they're very, very unrepresentative. And let's now compare this to the city council. Now, the city council, has 51 members. They represent 150,000 people each. Over 40% of the members are people of color. It's far more representative than any special election could ever be in terms of the composition of the people who vote there. Everyone, as Patrick Moynihan used to say, is entitled to their own opinion, but not everyone's entitled to their own facts. And the facts over time have shown that special elections draw a very small percentage of the voting base. And regardless of the issue, and even when we've seen the referendum during the fall election, they have a drop-off, as everyone here has pointed out. Treating these as something special, as if they're more democratic than an elected city council, is simply untrue in terms of the representation we know of what occurs in our council versus what occurs in these special elections. And finally, I want to make a point, which is this. We always have to understand that the council amends the charter frequently. We heard it already Richard Bruffaut pointed out of Columbia Law School. It amended the charter when it dealt with the term limit law. It amended the charter on a referendum-approved issue of the Civilian Control Review Board. Amending the charter, even referendum-passed things, it's not something unusual. It's a way of life. That's one of the instruments we give to our elected officials. So I think we have to point out that, one, there is no special democratic value in special elections if we look at the history of them. And I also should point out that referendums around the country are always used to kind of limit what government can do. If you look at the history of them, they're not necessarily done because they're representative, they're done because they're a way of bypassing other electoral processes. And so what are we left with? We're left with the fact that we are undermining our own elected officials by limiting them to 8 years. We have to recognize that this city government is not something which is dealing with one service. We have a city which we've decided is going to provide an abundance of services to people, which requires lots of areas of expertise. And if we don't have elected officials who can understand and gather the experience to do this, we hurt ourselves by limiting them to 2 terms of office. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mitchell.